I expect to pass through this world but once. Any good thing, therefore, that I can do, or any kindness I can show to any fellow human being, let me do it now. Time is too slow for those who wait, too swift for those who fear, too long for those who grieve, too short for those who rejoice. But for those who love, time is eternity. The slideshow you are about to see is called Mr. Willie. It is a true story about the class and the teacher which produced it. The show was produced between January and May of 1977 by Grade 6, Room 104 at Westword Elementary. The story begins now. Once upon a time, not long ago, there was a man named Willie. Most of the time in this story he is called Mr. Willie, because this is what most of the students in his class called him. He cared a great deal about his class, and found he was happiest when he was helping students learn things which would help them to be happy and successful. As a teacher, Mr. Willie felt he was spending most of his time hollering at his students. Time which should have been spent teaching, and this bothered him. He didn't holler because he was mad, only because he thought by hollering others would listen. Instead, as Mr. Willie talked louder, the class got louder, until finally he was hollering and no one could hear, because everyone was hollering.
Mr. Willie had been to college. He earned his teaching certificate and looked forward to teaching.
He soon learned he did not know the first thing about teaching. He found that the smartest teacher in the world can't teach a student who doesn't want to learn. To become a good teacher, Mr. Willie knew he must find a way to make students want to learn. He was surprised to find that interest in classes were not enough. What he found kept students from wanting to learn. The curriculum was not that easy to deal with. Many students in his class had been raised to think they should act like a man. Their idea of acting like a man was to be tough, not to have feelings, to be aggressive, and to show by their actions that they didn't need anyone to help them with anything. As a result, even though the students liked Mr. Willie, and he liked them, the following idea controlled the students' behavior. If the teacher is the big shot because he is in charge of the class, my peers will think I am pretty neat, or that I am tough, or at least I have a lot of power if I can control the teacher. This kind of thinking led some students to decide the only thing important in school was for them to find ways to control the teacher. They learned how to control Mr. Willie. They had 5 years to practice in previous grades. They knew if they got out of their seat, he would tell them to sit down. So they were controlling him because they were making him tell them to sit down. Students found that if they got into trouble out on the playground, Mr. Willie would sit down and talk with them to try to find out why they set themselves up to get into trouble. They knew that if they learned how to do division, after Mr. Willie tried everything he knew to teach in division, he would give up and say to himself, "I'm no good. If I was good, I could teach everyone how to divide, because they would want to learn what I want to teach. I haven't done this, so I must not be any good."
As a result, Mr. Willie would go home, sad because the student was not learning to divide. A game is what was happening and everyone was playing the game.
If you would have gone into Mr. Willie's class with a stopwatch and let it run if he was teaching and stop it every time he needed to ask someone to pay attention to do his work when he needed to explain something because few were listening, you would have found that the watch would stop more than it was running.
Mr. Willie knew this was happening. At times he would like to give up. He couldn't because he still cared.
He asked himself, how can I change the situation so school can be worthwhile for everyone? The answer came like so many other things in life, that when things got so bad they couldn't get worse, they had to get better.
Mr. Willie took students to the mountains. They went jeeping, sledding, mountain climbing, and during this time it was no longer teacher and student, but people sharing and having fun together. When they returned to Denver, Mr. Willie would hear students say, "He isn't so bad after all." By their words, he knew what they were really saying was, "Willie really does care about me. He isn't teaching just to earn $1."
Now Mr. Willie began to notice that when he got after a student for doing something wrong, they'd accept this as a logical consequence for their action. Not that he was picking on them because he didn't like them, they began developing feelings of empathy for Mr. Willie.
This is one reason the feeling of the class began to change for the better. One step had been taken in the right direction, but more steps still had to be taken.
No way had to be found to help students who came to school uptight because of things which had gone wrong at home, before or after school or outside the classroom.
A key was found to help unlock another important door when Mr. Willie took a class which taught a method of analyzing and understanding behavior.
Transaction analysis was a model which could be used to talk about behavior. Mr. Willie presented the basic concept of TA as a way of discussing things which were happening within or between the people.
The hope was that if he and his students could understand why they did what they did and how what they did determined what would happen to them, they would end up wanting to do what was best for them and others, rather than being driven by some internal force which was self-destructive, because they could not understand it or control it.
By being able to consciously control their behavior, each person became more free. They were no longer compelled to be a slave to their self or ideas which helped no one.
Now, if a fight took place on the playground, the class would sit down with their teacher and figure out why they were pulled into such a situation.
They learned they could talk about behavior or transactions from 6 possible levels. 3 of these levels would allow them to interact with other people and feel okay while making others feel okay. The other 3 levels would make them and others feel not okay.
By learning what these different levels were, the class was able to talk about them. Now, if a student said, "I hate you, Willie," he could reply, "You don't have anything to hate me for. That is just your rebellious child controlling you."
Once a student realized his feeling of hate was based on distortions within himself, not the reality around him, the hate went away.
Mr. Willie soon learned that if he came down on a student or anyone from his critical parent, they would most likely respond from one of their not okay positions. Such not okay transactions didn't help the student or the teacher.
Students learned that one reason they were afraid to ask questions was because their compliant child was responding to not okay messages from their parent which said, "Don't ask questions, others will think you're dumb."
By learning the three not okay ego states, critical parent, compliant child, or rebellious child, a student could recognize when he's in one of them and get himself out of that not okay ego state.
Mr. Willie learned that if he was crabbing at the students from a not okay ego state, such as a critical parent, all he had to do was stop and say out loud or to himself, "Wait a minute, I know I'm coming down on you for my critical parent, and I shouldn't be. Now let's stop and start all over. This time I will come from an okay ego state." The okay ego state he could switch to could be a nurturing parent, which would help the child change in a positive way.
Adult, which is just a method or level of dealing with facts. Or it could be natural child, in which Willie might say, "It really makes me mad when I see you do that, because something inside me really gets hurt when I see someone taking advantage of another person." Natural child deals with the immediate feelings of glad, mad, sad, and fear. With TA knowledge, Mr. Willie and his class took one more big step toward a better class, toward better feelings about themselves, others, and life.
The things in this story were good, but they still weren't enough. The reason they weren't enough had to do with habits the students and even Mr. Willie had gotten into. The habit of getting attention by doing the wrong thing was probably the worst of all.
In an attempt to break such a habit, the class made a film strip.
In that film strip, they dealt with the ideas of warm fuzzies, which were positive strokes, cold pricklies, which were negative strokes, and counterfeit warm fuzzies, which were fake positive strokes.
Making the film strip caused the students to become aware that warm fuzzies made them feel good or okay, that cold pricklies made them feel not good or not okay. They began to understand how people need the attention of other people, and if they didn't get that attention, they were going to die.
They learned how little babies will die if they are left in a crib without being touched, and how the need to be touched continues as a child grows older. People need to be touched with words or actions, with thoughts or ideas.
The surprising thing was that it didn't matter if someone got touched in a way which would make them feel good, or a way which would make them feel bad. As long as they got touched, they would not die, and somehow students learned that early in life. For this reason, they each found their own special way to get touched, stroked, or stimulated.
What was sad was because many students soon found it easier to get cold pricklies out of life. They were spending most of their time earning cold pricklies, even though cold pricklies made them feel not okay and bad.
When some students saw the dead-end, one-way street they were on, they said to themselves, "Wait a minute, if warm fuzzies make me feel good and cold pricklies make me feel bad, if warm fuzzies make others feel okay and cold pricklies make them feel not okay, I am not going to give out any more cold pricklies, and I am not going to accept them from other people. When warm fuzzies are so rewarding to give and receive, why waste time on less than the best?"
And one warm fuzzy is better than 10 cold pricklies.
And I know I don't have to accept gold pickles if I don't want to. I have the information necessary to make my life and that of others worth living.
With this understanding, some of the students put themselves into Mr. Willie's shoes and realized that no matter how hard he tried to give out warm fuzzies, he couldn't get around to 30 students the way he needed to, because they understood when Mr. Willie was finally able to give them a warm fuzzy, they accepted it and let it last until they got another one to take its place.
Some of the students went so far as to say, "You know, my teacher's human also. If I need warm fuzzies to feel good, he probably needs them also." Now they gave Mr. Willie warm fuzzies, which made him feel good all over.
With all these changes, the problems still weren't solved, but they sure were smaller. Things weren't perfect yet, but they were sure a lot better.
There had to be one more thing, or at least there was one more thing which changed. This happened when Mr. Willie realized that some students had set him up and were controlling him so good that all he could do was crab at them.
He understood that they didn't want his warm fuzzies because they were getting so many cold pricklies out of him already. They didn't need any more attention. They didn't have room for any more attention because the cold pricklies and not okay feelings filled them completely.
Knowing how helpless he was, Mr. Willie would go home and say to himself, "I really feel bad. There has to be something better than this." Finally, when he got pushed into a corner and he didn't know any other way out, he took the problem to the students' parents.
What he learned was not what he thought he was going to find out. He expected the students' parents wouldn't care. Instead, he found they cared very much. So much, in fact, they were willing to go to a lot of extra work if it would help their child. Mr. Willie thought about something he had learned years earlier, something which is called behavior modification. Behavior modification theory said people do things because there was a reward for what they did.
By working with the parents, Mr. Willie was able to set up a system where the student would no longer get the reward of cold pricklies from parent or teacher.
Even though Mr. Willie was not able to give warm fuzzies the way he would like to have, he was able to work with the parents so the parents would give warm fuzzies. As a result, the student accepted that their teacher was giving them warm fuzzies in an indirect way. This was done by use of a ticket system.
By using the ticket system, Mr. Willie would make it worth the students' time to learn. For example, long division. Lots of good things began to happen as a student began to learn. For example, long division. They would say to themselves, "You know, I'm not so dumb after all. Here I have been going all year saying I can't do it, and now I just did it. The reason I learned was because I knew I would lose tickets unless I really tried to learn. As soon as I tried to learn, I learned."
Now, all of a sudden, the student began to feel okay feelings because he was getting warm fuzzy feeling. Not only from the joy Mr. Willie had when he saw them learning, but the joy which came from within themselves when they saw they could do it, that they weren't so dumb after all.
Because of the things in this story, the class as a whole moved from one where many were looking out for themselves at the expense of everyone else, to one where most were really caring and helping everyone else.
Who knows where the story will end? Sometimes when Mr. Willie says to his class, "You know, you are the best class I ever had," some of the students say, That is what you told my sister 4 years ago. You tell every class that. This may have been true. The fact does remain that the things which happened in this slideshow are the things which made at least this one class the very best Mr. Willie ever had.
By being the best class, the class is saying every person in the class was the best also.
And they could mean it when they said that, because they knew that being the best didn't mean measuring themselves against someone else. What it meant was becoming their best self. By learning what they really were, they learned they were pretty neat.
They no longer needed to tell themselves they were okay, because they felt like they were okay, and they knew in their heart that they were okay. They were now like everyone else, who had learned that being okay is not pushing the other guy down until he is lower than you. Instead, it is by lifting yourself up, by finding and using the warm fuzzies that are everywhere for those who care to find them.
What do you think will happen next? This ends our story as it was originally planned. Following on this tape is an afterthought by Mr. Willie, accompanied by real-life pictures which are related symbolically to his thoughts. We hope you have enjoyed this program. We have enjoyed producing it for you. Sincerely, Grade 6, Room 104. A final thought about Mr. Willie should revolve around this idea.
We interrupt this slideshow to tell the projectionist to put the projector on 8-second automatic advance.
And so, as our story ends, things look bright and cheery, good and optimistic. The fact remains that the things which make this story end on a positive note are also the things which could let the story end on a negative note. They are also the things which could turn a positive story into one which is not so positive after all. If you take all the facts and break them down to the most simple unit, to the most simple ideas, the idea is that because people are in fact free to create the kind of world which they want, because Mr. Willie is not God and does not try to be God, he, as well as everyone else, knows that what makes a happy ending is when the majority of students, as well as himself, are able to choose the positive stroke, warm fuzzy way of life. The fact remains, not everyone will make this choice. And because this choice must come from within each person, and because each person must be free to experiment, to experience, to try, to fail, to learn by their mistakes, the danger is that in this process, a controlling part of the class will decide it is too risky to try to take the warm fuzzy route, that there aren't enough guarantees they will receive the strokes they need to stay alive. As a result, they may choose the cold, prickly, not okay way of life. They will choose this not because it makes them feel good, only because for some unexplainable reason they were unable to take the risk to get into okay feelings. And if they did take the risk, they were not able to stick with it long enough to win. These will be the people where the saying, "Winners never quit and quitters never win," will hold true. The fact remains that within any class there will always be those at both ends of the scale. Those who feel okay, who give warm fuzzies, who don't accept cold pricklies. Some of these students have been going all the way from first grade like this. At the other end of the scale, there will be those who will never give warm fuzzies, who will not accept warm fuzzies from others, many of whom have been going since first grade in this condition. It has been hard for Mr. Willie to accept that he has little effect on the extreme ends of this scale. No matter how much he gives, he is unable to give enough to the student who feels so not okay that he will not accept okay feelings. Mr. Willie is also aware and thankful to the students who have it together so much, who feel so okay with their self, that even if he, the teacher, makes a mistake and passes a not okay feeling to one of these students, they understand, but have no reason to accept that not okay feeling. Because they have it together so good, even their teacher poses no threat to their security and their being okay. For those in the center, it is a process of struggle and learn and struggle, try and fail, try and succeed, with no guarantee of what the end result will be. There are the students who will return 2 or 3 years later to say things like, "I made the honor roll, Mr. Willie," or "Math is so easy, I am getting straight A's because we learned that all in the 6th grade," or "I have decided to be a lawyer or a doctor." Some will return to say, "Well, I am going to drop out of school this year. I have failed every class I have taken for the last 3 years, and now I will be old enough to drop out of school legally." The child who went through on the extreme end of okay feelings will be the one who will return to say, "I was voted head girl for the whole school." The one on the not okay end will be the one Mr. Willie will hear went to prison because he shot someone. Even though there will always be the extremes, Mr. Willie's hope is that the class portrayed in this slideshow is a class which will as a whole shift toward the positive, okay feelings, so as to maximize the number of students who will return to share the warm feeling of being on the honor roll. The hope is such a positive shift will minimize the number of students who will have to be written off as one of the examples of how that student, Mr. Willie, the school, the home, and society failed.
There's a land that I see where the children are free, and I say it ain't far to this land from where we are. Take my hand, come with me, where the children are free. Come with me, take my hand, and we'll live in a land where the river runs free, in a land through the green country, in a to be. And you and me are free with you and me.